The wind was strong that night. Jack sat alone in his small wooden cabin, deep in the snowy mountains. A fire burned in the corner, giving a soft, warm glow. Outside, snow kept falling, covering everything in white. It was peaceful but lonely. Jack lived far away from the cities, away from people. He liked the quiet, the silence, the space. But that night, something was different. He heard a sound knock, very light, almost like a whisper against the door. Jack froze. No one ever came up here, not. In the middle of a snowstorm, he waited, holding his breath. Knock, knock, softer this time, but clearly real. He slowly stood up and reached for the old shotgun by the wall. Just in case, he opened the door. And there she was. Not a human. She looked like a woman, but not quite. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly under the falling snow. Her eyes were large, silver, full of pain and fear. She wore torn clothing, thin and dirty, not made for this cold. She was shaking badly, her lips blue. Then she collapsed. Right there on his doorstep, Jack caught her just in time. He stared at her strange face, unsure what to do. She didn't look dangerous, just lost, starving, freezing, weak. He made a choice. He carried her inside. The fire was warm, but she was colder than ice. He wrapped her in blankets and placed her close to the flames. She didn't speak, didn't move much, only breathed very softly. Jack boiled water and made soup from a can. He tried giving her a spoonful, but she barely opened her mouth. Still, a small drop touched her tongue, and she made a sound, a soft whimper, like a child. He sat beside her all night, watching, waiting. In the morning, she was still alive. Her body had stopped shaking, but her eyes were closed. Suddenly she moved slowly and looked at Jack. He felt something strange, like she was searching his face, looking deep into him. Then she tried to sit up, weak and slow. He helped her without a word. She pointed at her mouth, then at her throat. She couldn't speak. Jack nodded slowly, understanding. She held out a small object, broken and flashing red. It looked like a tiny machine, covered in strange marks. Then it blinked once and went dark. Jack didn't know what it was, but it seemed important. He looked at her and said, "You can stay here until you're better." She blinked slowly, like she understood. She pointed at herself, then looked at him with a question in her eyes. Jack smiled a little. "I'll call you Lyra," he said. She stared at him, then gave a small nod. He started teaching her simple words, pointing at objects and saying their names. She listened carefully, like a fast learner. Days passed, and she grew stronger. She walked around the cabin slowly, touching things, watching Jack work. She never went near the window, and every night, she looked up at the stars like she missed someone. Jack noticed something else, strange lights in the sky some nights, not stars, but moving lights, silent and fast. He wondered if they were looking for her. One evening, after dinner, Jack stepped outside to get more firewood. The cold air bit his skin, but he didn't mind as he gathered the wood. He saw something strange on the ground near the cabin. A circle of burnt snow, perfectly round, black and melted. He frowned. That hadn't been there before. He looked around but saw no one, no tracks, no sound, nothing but the falling snow. He picked up the wood and hurried back inside. Lyra was sitting by the fire, holding the broken device again. She looked up as Jack entered, her eyes wide. He set the wood down, still thinking about the burn mark. Just as he turned to make more soup, he heard a whisper. It was soft, almost not there, but he heard it clearly. Jack. He froze. He looked at Lyra. Her lips were closed, but her eyes were locked on him. He stepped closer. "Did you say something?" She didn't move, didn't answer. Then again, he heard it clearer this time. Jack, his name, spoken in a voice that wasn't hers, yet came from her direction. The broken device in her hand glowed faintly again. Jack's heart pounded. She had never spoken before, and yet, now, somehow she said his name. He looked at her closely. "Who are you?" he whispered. Lyra only stared back, her silver eyes shining with something new, fear. and maybe. Warning, asterisk, the cabin was quiet again, but Jack was not calm. He kept hearing that voice in his mind. His name, spoken soft and strange as if it came from somewhere else. He looked at Lyra, who was now sitting near the fire, her hands wrapped around the warm mug he gave her. She didn't speak again, not with her mouth, not with the strange voice, but her eyes followed him like she knew what he was thinking. Jack couldn't explain it, but he felt watched, not just by Lyra, but by something else. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking at the dark trees outside. Snow kept falling, slow and silent. Then just after midnight, he saw it. A faint shape moved between the trees. It was tall, almost blending into the snow and shadows. It stood still. For a long time, too long, like it wasn't alive. Jack grabbed his shotgun and stepped outside. But when he reached the spot, there was nothing. No tracks, no movement, only cold wind. He returned inside and locked the door tight. Lyra hadn't moved from the fire, but her eyes were open now. She pointed at the door, then at her neck again. Shaking her head slowly, Jack understood. She knew someone or something was out there. The next morning, Jack found her sitting at the table, drawing shapes on a piece of paper. They looked like stars, planets and strange symbols. He pointed at the biggest symbol, a triangle inside a circle, and asked, "What's this?" She tapped it once, then tapped her own chest. Jack frowned. "That's you?" She nodded, then circled the symbol with her finger, as if warning him. Suddenly, the device in her hand blinked again. Just for a second, it lit up with a soft red glow, then faded. Jack felt something cold inside him. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't dead yet. He tried to go back to his normal routine, cooking, fixing the firewood box, melting snow for water. But he kept looking over his shoulder. Every time he left the cabin, he felt like he was being watched. Lyra stayed close to him, never speaking, but always aware. She cleaned the cabin, helped with cooking, and watched him work, copying his moves. Jack started feeling like she wasn't just recovering anymore. She was learning fast. One day, she picked up the hammer and began fixing the broken steps without being told. He was surprised but impressed. Still at night, she stood by the window, staring at the stars again. One evening, Jack found her outside, standing barefoot in the snow, arms lifted toward the sky. Her skin glowed faintly blue, and her breath made strange patterns in the air. He pulled her back inside, confused and a little afraid. She didn't resist, just looked at him with sad eyes. He asked her again, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" No answer. She just looked down and pointed at the broken device again. Jack turned it over, trying to see if it could be fixed, but he had no idea how it worked. Later that night, he woke up suddenly, heart pounding. He had heard something movement on the roof. He grabbed his flashlight and shotgun and climbed up the attic steps. There were scratch marks on the roof edge, deep and fresh, like claws had dragged across the wood. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, Lyra was already up, boiling water. She moved like she belonged here now, like this was her home. Jack made a decision. He would keep her safe, no matter what. Even if strange shadows followed them, even if the device kept blinking, even if her past was full of danger. But then something happened that changed everything again. While chopping wood outside, Jack noticed a shape half buried in the snow. He brushed it off and picked it up. It was metal, smooth and black, and it blinked red once when he touched it. He had no idea what it was, but when he brought it inside and showed Lyra, her face went pale. She stepped back quickly, shaking her head. Then she rushed to the window and looked out into the woods. She whispered one word. Her voice cracked and broken. "No." Jack stood beside her, heart pounding. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. She just turned to him slowly, her eyes full of fear, and pointed at the device, then at the trees, then back at the floor under their feet. Jack looked down, then followed her eyes. She pointed under the rug. He lifted it and found a blinking red light. A small circle had been placed under the floorboards. A tracker, Jack's breath caught in his throat. Someone knew they were here. Someone had marked this cabin, and whoever they were coming. He looked at Lyra again, and for the first time, saw her not as a guest or a helpless alien, but someone running from a terrible danger, and now that danger had found them both. Jack didn't move for a long time. He stared at the blinking red light hidden beneath the floor. His hands felt cold even though the fire was still burning. Lyra stepped back slowly. Her silver eyes fixed on the tracker. She looked like she was trying not to cry. Jack picked up the device and walked outside. He smashed it with a hammer again and again until the light went out. But he knew it was too late. Whoever was looking for Lyra, they had already seen it. Back inside, Lyra sat with her hands over her mouth. She looked smaller now, not because of her size, but because of fear. Jack sat across from her, trying to stay calm. "You need to tell me the truth," he said softly. She didn't answer, just reached into her coat and pulled out a flat silver coin. She touched the middle, and the coin lit up with a hologram. Floating in the air were 3 figures tall. Armored and faceless, they wore dark suits and carried long weapons. Lyra pointed at one of them, then at her shoulder. Jack looked closely and saw the same symbol from the drawing, the triangle inside the circle. Then she turned around and pulled down her coat. The same mark was burned into her skin. Jack's breath caught. It wasn't a tattoo, it was a brand Lyra had been owned. She had escaped from them. He felt something rise in his chest. Anger. She wasn't just some lost alien. She was a fugitive, running from monsters who treated her like a thing. Jack stood up and started pacing. Why here? Why me? Why my cabin in the middle of nowhere? He asked, not shouting, but close to it. Lyra looked at him, then held up the broken device again. She pressed the edge, and it made a small flicker. A map blinked into the air stars, lines, circles. One of the glowing dots blinked red, then zoomed in on Earth. Then it zoomed further, down to the mountains, the trees, the snow, and finally, his cabin. Lyra pointed at it, then placed her hand over her heart. Jack understood, but it made no sense. "You were looking for this place," he said slowly. Lyra nodded. She showed him another hologram, this time of a human face. It was blurry, old, maybe from years ago. The man in the image looked like Jack, but older, with a beard and white hair. He wore a uniform with Earth's flag on the chest. Jack had never seen him before, but somehow it felt familiar. His name appeared under the image, Captain Elias R. Carter. Jack whispered the name out loud, and Lyra looked surprised. She pointed at Jack, then at the name. Jack shook his head. "That's not me." But she kept nodding. He looked around the room, confused and tense. Then he remembered his grandfather was in the military, a space pilot, one of the first to join the deep missions. Jack never knew much, only that he disappeared in space long ago. No body, no return, only silence. Could this be the same man? Had Lyra been searching for someone connected to him? Before he could ask more, the fire crackled sharply, and the lights flickered. Lyra's eyes widened, and she ran to the window outside. A thin red beam swept across the trees, slow and silent, a scout drone. Jack dropped to the floor and pulled her down beside him. They stayed low and quiet. The drone passed over the cabin, paused, then moved on. Jack watched it disappear into the snowstorm, but the fear stayed behind. He looked at Lyra, who was now shaking again. She whispered something in her own language, soft and broken. He didn't know the words, but he felt the meaning. She was sorry for bringing danger to him. Jack touched her shoulder gently. "You're not alone anymore," he said. She looked up at him with wide eyes, surprised. Then, for the first time, she smiled. It was small, weak, but real. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He packed emergency bags, filled with food, tools, maps. He checked his old radio, but it was still broken. He loaded his shotgun and set traps around the cabin. The cold wind howled outside, but the fire stayed warm. Lyra curled up near the hearth, the broken device in her hand. Jack sat beside her, eyes on the window. He knew they would come soon. Not just one scout drone, but the soldiers from the hologram, and when they did, he would be ready, not just for Lyra's sake, but for his own, because now, her fight had become his too. And whoever they were, those faceless hunters, they were not taking her without a fight. Asterisk, the snow kept falling. But now it felt heavier, like the sky knew something bad was coming. Jack stood outside the cabin, his eyes scanning the trees. Every sound made him turn, every shadow made his heart beat faster. He wasn't just watching for wild animals anymore. He was waiting for soldiers, not human ones, alien ones. The kind that didn't ask questions before they pulled the trigger. Inside, Lyra was fixing a broken piece of tech from her coat. Her fingers moved fast, twisting wires, tapping small glowing parts. Jack didn't know what she was making, but she looked focused. He had started to see her differently now, not as a lost creature, not even just as someone in danger, but as someone dangerous, not in a bad way. She was smart, fast, and strong. She had escaped something most people couldn't. She had survived it, and now, she was helping him prepare. They worked in silence for hours. Jack built traps out of wire, nails, and parts from old machines. He taught Lyra how to fire a hunting rifle. She wasn't a great shot, but she learned fast. She never missed the same mistake twice later. While checking the back of the cabin, Jack found a bag he didn't remember packing. Inside were strange supplies, metal bars, black cloth, small discs with blinking lights. He brought it to Lyra, and her eyes lit up. She pulled out one of the discs and placed it on the wall. It melted into the wood, turning invisible. Jack stared at her, confused. She held up her hand and said a new word in English, slow but clear. Shield. It hit Jack then. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting them. Lyra had begun calling the cabin home. She had begun calling him family. That night, as the storm got worse, they ate together at the small wooden table. Jack made soup. Lyra helped cut vegetables. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Their eyes did the talking now. Trust was growing. After dinner, Lyra opened the device again and showed Jack a recording. It was a memory. He saw a dark cell, metal walls, electric bars. Lyra was there, younger, weaker, with other aliens in cages. Then came the soldiers, the same ones, with faceless masks. They pulled her out by the arm, dragging her across the floor. The image ended there, and Lyra closed the device, her hand shaking. Jack said nothing. He just placed his hand over hers. He wanted her to know he saw her pain, that she didn't have to hide it here. But before the silence could settle, the lights flickered. The fire dimmed for half a second. Then a loud beep echoed from the wall. One of Lyra's shields had been triggered. Jack jumped to his feet, grabbed his shotgun, and looked at her. She nodded once, already pulling out a second device from under the floorboards. They moved together, fast but quiet, outside. Something heavy stepped through the snow, not one step, but many. Jack opened a slit in the wall and looked out. Figures in black armor, walking through the trees. 3 of them, just like the hologram. One of them held a long scanner, blinking red. As it passed over the cabin, Jack felt sweat run down his back. He turned to Lyra and whispered, "Now what?" She pointed to the corner of the room, to a small metal pipe Jack had thought was broken. She pressed a button, and the pipe slid open, revealing a hidden tunnel under the cabin. Jack stared in shock. She had been building this without him noticing. He realized then Lyra had been preparing all along, not just to hide, but to escape if needed. But he shook his head. "No escape," he whispered. "Not this time." He wasn't running anymore. Neither was she. They stayed inside as the soldiers came closer. The cabin creaked. The snow on the roof shifted. Then silence, not even wind. Just the sound of boots in the snow. Jack held his breath, finger on the trigger. Lyra placed a small round disc by the front door, pressing the center. A soft blue light covered the door like a curtain. Moments later, one of the soldiers knocked, hard and slow, just like she had on that first night. Jack looked at Lyra. his heart pounding in his chest. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then the soldier spoke, through a deep translator voice. "Return the stolen property." Jack gritted his teeth. She was not property, she was family, and they were not getting her back. The voice outside the door was cold and sharp. It didn't sound alive, not fully. "Return the stolen property," it repeated again. Jack felt the weight of the shotgun in his hands. His cabin was small, old, and wooden, never made to face this kind of threat, yet he stood there like a wall, blocking Lyra with his body. He didn't say a word. Lyra moved behind him, pressing buttons on her small device. Jack didn't know what she was doing, but he trusted her now more than anyone else. The silence outside stretched. Then came another sound. Clicking, whirring, soft but clear. One of the soldiers was scanning the walls. Lyra suddenly touched Jack's arm and whispered one word. "Leave?" Jack looked at her in shock. She pointed to the tunnel under the cabin, her eyes begging him. "But?" Jack shook his head. "No," he said. "Not without you." She looked down, struggling, as if a storm was inside her. Then her body began to glow, just a little, just enough to light her skin with that same pale blue from before. Jack stepped back, stunned. She had never done that before. She wasn't just an escapee. There was something more than she had told him. He whispered, "Lyra, what are you?" But she didn't answer. The door shook suddenly, loud and hard. One of the soldiers was trying to break it down. Another hit followed. Jack pointed his gun, his heart slamming against his ribs. The shield Lyra placed over the door flickered with each hit, holding for now, but it wouldn't hold forever. Jack turned to her. "We can't win like this." She looked at him and said, slowly and carefully, "We fight." Her voice was rough, broken, but filled with something new, courage. She pulled out a small black cube from her coat and pressed both thumbs to its sides. The cube unfolded, turning into a curved device that attached to her arm. It hummed softly, then clicked into place. She took a deep breath and nodded to Jack. The door shook again this time. It cracked slightly. Lyra moved fast, placing two of her glowing discs near the base of the walls. Jack realized they weren't shields. They were charges, explosives. He almost said something, but she gave him a sharp look that said, "Trust me." He backed away, holding his shotgun tight. Outside, one of the soldiers shouted, "You are out of time." Lyra pressed a button, and the cabin lights dimmed completely. Darkness wrapped around them. Then the door exploded inward with a flash of fire and smoke. But at that very moment, Lyra threw one of her discs at the feet of the soldiers. It burst open, releasing a blinding light. The soldiers were stunned, stumbling through the doorway. Jack fired once, hitting the wall, missing. Lyra moved like a shadow, slipping through the smoke, landing a strike with her glowing arm. It hit one soldier square in the chest and sent him flying back. The other two opened fire, red beams cutting through the room. Jack ducked behind a shelf and returned fire. His shots didn't do much, but they slowed the attackers. Lyra jumped again, landing a kick that shattered the second soldier's mask. Jack couldn't believe what he was seeing. She moved like she had trained for years, like she had been built for this. He shouted her name, and she turned to him just as one soldier aimed at his head. She threw her last disc, and it exploded mid-air, blinding the attacker long enough for Jack to shoot him straight in the leg. The soldier dropped, metal and blood spilling onto the floor. Smoke filled the cabin now, heat and noise making everything confusing. Jack coughed hard and grabbed Lyra's hand. She looked tired, her glow flickering. He pulled her toward the hidden tunnel. They dropped into the cold passage just as the last soldier tried to fire again. But before they crawled far, Lyra turned back and pressed one last button. The two charges she placed on the walls lit up bright blue. Seconds later, the whole cabin shook with a deep rumble. A wave of heat and dust rolled through the tunnel. Jack and Lyra crawled until they reached the end, pushing open the hidden door behind a large pine tree. Outside, the snow was falling harder. Smoke rose in the distance where the cabin once stood. Was gone now, the place they called home. Destroyed, Lyra collapsed in the snow, breathing hard. Jack fell beside her, holding her tight. They had survived, but this wasn't over. Now they were on the run again. And whoever sent those soldiers would send more. The fire was gone. The cabin was gone. The only thing left was smoke, and the trail they left behind in the snow. Jack and Lyra moved through the frozen forest. Step by step, breath by breath, neither spoke. There were no words for what they had just escaped. They reached an old ranger's tower, abandoned, broken, but still standing. Jack used to hike here years ago, before he chose to live alone. He never thought this place would be his shelter again, not with an alien girl beside him. Inside, they found a half-rotten bed, a rusted radio, and some dusty canned food. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the night. Jack started a small fire using dry wood he kept there long ago. Lyra sat near the wall, arms around her knees, glowing faintly. She looked weaker now, like the light inside her was fading. Jack handed her a warm blanket and said nothing. He had learned that silence often worked better than questions. But that night, she spoke. Her voice was soft and low. "They come again." Jack looked at her. "How many?" She shook her head. "More." He stared at the fire, feeling the weight of it all settle in his chest. Then she said something else, something he didn't expect. "They not stop until I gone." Jack frowned. "What do you mean gone?" She pointed to herself, then pressed a finger to his chest. "Safe if I go," she whispered. He stood up quickly. "No, we're not doing that. You're not running away again, not alone." She looked away, her silver eyes shining with tears. Jack stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "You said we're family, remember?" She nodded slowly. "Then we fight together," he said. Lyra reached into her coat and pulled out the silver coin again. She tapped it once, and a blue light glowed in the center. It showed a map again, but this time, there was something new, a symbol blinking in green, far away, across mountains. Jack pointed at it. "What's that?" She smiled a little. "Home." He blinked. "Your home?" She nodded, then whispered, "Not old home. Real one." She explained slowly, piece by piece, in broken English. There were two kinds of people on her planet, those who ruled with force, and those who hid in peace. She had escaped the rulers, the hunters, the ones who marked her. But she was part of a hidden group, protectors of something ancient. Jack listened carefully as she told him the truth. Her bloodline was not just important, it was sacred, and the people coming after her wanted her power, he asked. "What power?" She placed her hand on the wall, and the wood turned warm and soft, glowing for a second. "I speak to machines," she said. "I wake them." Jack stared in silence. She wasn't just running from danger, she was the danger, at least to them. The ones who chased her feared what she could do. And now he understood why. Later that night, while Jack fixed the broken radio, Lyra stood on the tower deck, looking at the stars. She whispered in her language, speaking words he couldn't understand. Then something unbelievable happened. A light in the sky blinked. Once, then twice. Not a star, not a plane. It moved like it was answering her. Jack stepped out beside her, eyes wide. "You did that?" he asked. She nodded, tired but hopeful. "I call them my people." Jack looked up, heart racing. "Will they come?" "Maybe," she whispered. Then she turned to him. "But we must survive until then." The next morning, they packed what they could and headed toward the green blinking dot. It would take days to reach, maybe more, but it was their only chance as they moved through the deep snow. Jack heard a sharp sound in the distance, a hum, low, steady, mechanical. He turned around and saw it. A ship, black and sleek, moving just above the trees, scanning, searching. They dropped to the ground, hiding behind a fallen log. The ship hovered for a moment, then flew off toward the burned cabin. They had been seconds away from being seen. Jack looked at Lyra, and for the first time, he felt the fear she had lived with for so long. But she wasn't trembling. She looked forward, toward the blinking green light on the map. Jack followed her gaze. If they could reach that place, maybe things would change. Maybe she would find her people again. Maybe Earth would learn who she really was, and maybe, just maybe, he would learn who he really was too. The mountain air was colder now. Each breath felt sharp, like tiny knives in Jack's chest. He and Lyra had been walking for 3 days, through snow, wind, and silence. The blinking green light on her device had grown brighter, closer, but so had the danger at night. They saw the black ship in the sky again, circling slowly, searching the mountains with red lights like hungry eyes. It was only a matter of time before they were found again. On the 4th morning, the map beeped softly. Lyra stopped walking and stared at the screen. They had arrived. There was nothing around them except snow and quiet hills. Jack looked at her, confused. This is it. She nodded once and stepped forward. She reached into her coat and pulled out the glowing silver coin again. She placed it on the ground, then pressed both hands on the cold snow. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground began to hum. The snow shifted, falling into lines and patterns. The earth below shook gently. Jack backed away as the ground opened slowly. A circle of stone rose up, glowing with blue light. Lyra stood in the middle, her body shining with energy he had never seen before. Her voice echoed, not loud, but powerful. Words in her language filled the air like music. Then the sky answered. A soft ripple above them opened like a door. From the light came a ship, silver and bright, moving like it swam through air. It wasn't like the black ships from before. This one was alive with warmth, color, and beauty. It floated down slowly, and Jack felt something strange. Peace. For the first time since this all began, he felt peace. Ship touched down silently, and a figure stepped out, not human, but graceful, tall, glowing with the same blue light as Lyra. The figure spoke in her language, and Lyra replied quickly, almost like a child coming home. Then she turned to Jack and walked toward him. She placed her hand in his and said, "They are my people." Nodded slowly. "I can see that. They came because you helped me." She whispered, "You saved me." Jack looked away for a moment. "You saved me too," he said softly. The figure from the ship approached Jack, speaking slowly and broken English. "You are human," they said. "Yet." "Not just human," Jack blinked. "What do you mean?" The figure pointed to Lyra, then to him. "You are connected. Old blood, old path." Lyra opened her device again and showed Jack another image, his grandfather, Elias Carter, standing beside aliens who looked like Lyra's people. Long ago, he had made a promise to protect one of their own, a promise passed down by blood. That promise had now reached Jack, and he had kept it. The ground shook again, but this time not from the ship. In the distance, the black hunter ship was returning, faster now, louder. Jack raised his weapon, ready to fight, but Lyra stopped him. "This time we are not alone," she said. The silver ship released a wave of blue energy that spread across the sky. It hit the hunter ship like a wall of wind, shutting down its engines in seconds. The black ship crashed into the trees, far away, silent and smoking. Lyra's people had protected them. They had come not just for her, but for both of them. Jack looked at the ship, then at Lyra. She took his hand and said, "Come with me." He hesitated, looking back at the world he knew, the mountains, the snow, the broken cabin that was once his home. Then he looked at Lyra, the girl who had once knocked on his door. Starving and afraid, now she was strong, glowing, no longer alone, and neither was he. He nodded. "Let's go." Together they stepped into the ship. The door closed, and the world below began to fade. Stars appeared all around them, stretching into forever. Lyra stood beside him, her hand still holding his. She smiled and said, "One last thing. You are not just family," she whispered. "You are home."